What's up, everybody? It's Jason Cruz here once again with another episode of The Interview. And today's topic is on the book Murder on Federal Street. I bought it. I didn't even get a free copy. It's Sean Nam. Sean, boxing writer. For those who listen to and read USA Today, BoxingJunkie.com. You know him as a writer, and he's come out with his debut book, Murder on Federal Street, Tyrone Everett, The Black Mafia, Fixed Fights, and the Last Golden Age of Philadelphia Boxing. Sean, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jason. And you could have asked. I would have sent you a copy.
Oh no! I don't. Every time, no, I don't. I realize as a writer
I just want to make that
myself.
clear to your readers. I did not reject a request or anything, but
No, yes. No,
happily
I
accepted.
always like to buy from
I
people who
appreciate that.
are writing because
I appreciate that.
obviously it means a lot. It means a lot.
Yeah.
So yes, no, I didn't ask because I don't like asking for free stuff. So correct, Sean would have. I'm sure Sean would have given me a copy. But anyway, pleasantries aside, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Today is kind of crazy here in New York.
Oh yes,
Uh,
with the flooding.
a lot, yeah, torrential rain, flooding, and no surprise, our decrepit subway system cannot handle rain, and it's been a nightmare for people who've had to commute into the city. My wife was stranded on one of the trains for more than half an hour.
Oh no.
Just a very important engagement in the morning, but such is life in the big city.
Oh no. Well, if you do see an arc, please get on
Yeah.
it. So let's talk about the book, Murder on Federal Street. How did you come about getting on this subject of Tyrone Everett?
Well, the story had been suggested to me. People in boxing, um, especially kind of the older historian types out there, are very, very familiar with the story. How could they not? It involves an alleged crime of passion, drugs, and a fighter that many thought could have been Hall of Fame worthy, even. Um, so his death at 23 really kind of left behind a really sad legacy. Um, a good friend of mine, a mentor, and the person through whom I began to write about boxing, Carlos Acevedo. I think a lot of your readers are familiar with his name. Floated the idea to me. He had been really encouraging me to pursue a topic for a book. And I was like, I don't know anything about Tyrone, and so I kind of waded into the topic with a great amount of trepidation and reluctance, even. But doing the research, kind of looking over what had been written at the time and following his career, uh, things started to come together, and I saw the book take shape, and um, and it's really when I kind of discovered a lot of other kind of details that had been missing from the Everett narrative, whatever that may be, uh, is when I began to think, okay, we might have something here, and this kind of deserves to be told. And that's when things began to really roll for me.
And so the process of, well, I'm always interested on the process of pitching a book to a publisher that is willing to invest in it. How was it? I mean, did you do it yourself? Cold pitching? Did you have an agent? How did you go about, or did Carlos help you? How did you go about getting the opportunity to do this?
This was done completely independent of any publisher. It is a self-published book.
I should have known that. Oh, oh.
Um, yeah, I know the colophon on the spine may throw some people off. Rush Cutters Bay Books is not an actual LLC. I have to make that clear. But um, it is completely self-published. Uh, you know, I actually work in the publishing industry, so there's not like a great amount of like, there's a very, publishing with a traditional publisher is great. I can't tell you the kind of resources you get by being with one. Um, but like you say, this is a boxing book at its core, and boxing is a niche topic. People can talk about boxing's back. You hear that every other week when a fight is on. Well, no, it's really receding, and it's been receding for years. And publishers are capitalists like everybody else. They have to make a profit, and a niche topic like this probably won't catch the attention of a publisher. So from the get-go, when Carlos and I were even talking about this, the entire idea was, the model is there. Okay, the apparatus is there for somebody to pick this up, and if they do a good job, you could put a book out on the market that is comparable. You won't have the resources, the sales kind of machine, but if you know your audience and you know a thing or two about how to market it, you might be in good hands. And honestly, we're trying to get the story out. So, instead of spending all the time trying to find an agent, because their publishing world is full of gatekeepers, you can't get through without an agent. Spending time on finding an agent and then pitching the book and then tailoring it to the kind of seasonal catalog cycle of the publisher, that's going to be years. And that's a lot of kind of non-writing effort and thinking. And I wasn't really interested in that. The idea was, let's, this, I mean, how many books can you think about that have been published on Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson? And here I am, like, thinking, okay, this is actually this is a really interesting story. It's never really been told at length, and never really been told accurately. And here's an opportunity for someone to do all those things, and that's what we attempted. And publishing on my own was, I think, the best method, and I have to say it's panned out so far.
So I applaud you because this is such a well-written book. Did you have to hire an editor, or
Shout out to Carlos.
was he
Shout
the
out
editor?
he was my editor.
Wow.
And yeah, and I had a book designer I never worked with before, but I had seen some of the other work that he had done. And Najdan is his name. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but he's credited in the book. And then I had my sister, who's a terrific artist, who designed the cover.
That's well, so that is great. Now this is another layer actually about this for this interview is then. So how was the research going into this book, because it's very detailed about Tyrone Everett. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I'm just a casual boxing fan, but I didn't know about him. And then just to place him in the 1970s, it was very interesting. How did you go about doing the research, and how many people did you get to interview for this book?
Right. So a lot of consultation of primary documents, newspaper accounts. So that meant just going through the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Daily News, the Tribune. There's a couple of local Jersey papers at the time, other local kind of Pennsylvania regional papers. Um, those were really crucial to just creating the framework and trying to conjure up this world that is 1970s Philadelphia. Um, and and then as far as the interviews are concerned, I probably reached out. I probably had about 20, at least 20 people that I interviewed and that made it to the book. And then probably a few more, maybe 25 or 30 that I had reached out to. But who was unable to, they were unable to supply me with anything um, especially relevant for the book. That was one of the um, fortunate things about writing this book at this time. That we're about 5 decades removed from the murder of Tyrone Everett, and there are still the key principal figures associated with Everett still alive. And I would not have been able to write the story the way that I did without the help of his promoter, J. Russell Peltz, his manager, Frank Gelb, his brother, Eddie Everett, among others. And then there are a smattering of other guys who were really involved on the Philadelphia boxing scene and who knew about the landscape. I'm thinking of guys like Don Majeski, a longtime matchmaker, um, jack of all trades, kind of guy that simply doesn't exist in boxing anymore. So yeah, timing was fortuitous.
So tell us a little bit about the book, and then I had some questions about the people that you reached out to, because it's a very interesting story. But why don't you lay it out for our listeners?
I'm sorry. So just about
The book
yeah.
about Tyrone Everett.
Yes. So Tyrone Everett was a leading lightweight contender in the 1970s. He kind of came out of nowhere. He was unheralded. Came from poverty-stricken neighborhood of South Philadelphia. It was not a great time in America, generally speaking, in the 70s. It was a very downbeat era. Incredible inflation going on, crime was on the rise, and Philadelphia, the kind of city center, was one of these forgotten places. Um, but Everett was a bright spot, and he quickly became a guy you had to regard. Um, and yet he was not really welcomed by the kind of reigning Philadelphia uh, fight scene. This was we're talking about a lefty southpaw, a southpaw who boxed the way you'd expect a southpaw to box. It was hit and not get hit. It was the Floyd Mayweather mantra before Mayweather even came along. And in the 70s, that really didn't fly well with a lot of people. The traditional notion of boxing is you come forward and you fight like Benny Briscoe, fight like Marvin Hagler. That's how you fought. And to kind of fight along the perimeter and flit your jab and then and then try to dress down your opponent by mocking him. All these things that the Philadelphia fight fan was taught to really kind of disregard. Everett was this kind of flagrant evidence to the contrary. So, the book recounts kind of his rise, and then it's supposed to come all to a head, in 1976, in November, when he gets his title shot, against, um, Alfredo Escalera of Puerto Rico. And this is a guy who'd been on the road and been knocking guys out. He had knocked out, uh, kind of the reigning Japanese champion at the time on Japanese soil. He was a hard hitter, and they brought him to Philadelphia, and they filled that place at the old Spectrum, which is like the legendary sporting arena at the time. It's no longer around. Um, and that was supposed to be Everett's coronation, and it seemed like that was going to be the case. But he didn't get the decision, in a fight that a lot of people thought he had easily won. It seemed like he had, boxed the ears off Escalera. Um, it's routinely cited, that fight, the Everett Escalera title fight. It's routinely cited as one of the worst decisions in boxing history. As I mentioned in the book, the late HBO analyst commentator Harold Letterman thought it might have been the worst decision he had ever seen, and this is a guy who'd been quite a number of fights. So Tyrone is known for that, for being robbed, of that title fight, and then his murder that happened 6 months later. It was found on the second floor, of a row home in South Philadelphia, kind of draped over a bed. He was shot in the eye, and it turns out that his girlfriend at the time had shot him. And so quickly you have what becomes a sensational trial in that neighborhood, where you have this lover who argues that she shot him in self-defense, in kind of a in self-defense, and also, out of jealousy. There were allegations that Tyrone had been in bed with a drug dealer, another male by the name of Tyrone. There were 39 packets of heroin carefully arranged on a dining room table on the first floor of the home in which he was found dead. Tyrone's reputation as a leading lightweight contender, that quickly went away, and in the years that have passed, one of the first things that you hear when you bring up the name to somebody who remembers that time is Tyrone's alleged affiliations with another man, his supposed drug dealing that he was doing on the side, just about everything that could damage a person's reputation. He had it. And in the book, I try to lay out what went on in the trial, what points were brought up, and then also kind of introduce new material to the story, which is, as I know, kind of somewhat provocatively in the subtitle, is associations with the Black Mafia. I don't know if you want me to talk about that more, if you want me to.
Oh, well, I was actually going to ask you. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's great context. I was actually going to ask you when you reached out to for this book
Yeah.
with his brother and his promoter and manager. How receptive were they to talk about all of these issues? Obviously, there was the underlying issue, I guess, that he was gay, or cross-dressing. And aside from that, being involved as perhaps maybe a drug dealer, maybe tied with unsavory types. All this while being probably the best fighter in that region, in that era.
Mhm. It's, a lot of it's funny. It's a lot of people either weren't even aware of the connection to begin with. When for example, if, Russell Peltz and his manager Frank Gell, really can uh, comment on his supposed street affiliations. These were guys who were cutting deals and working with Tyrone on kind of the business level. So they never really saw what was going on in Tyrone's personal life. Tyrone's brother, it's a sensitive topic. But he made it clear to me that he never believed that the girlfriend had actually shot Tyrone. And even if she did, that she wasn't really the one who uh, basically that she was set up to do it. And so that's where we
Paid
get
to
into,
do it, or she was set up.
she was I guess the word would be ordered or advised to
Hmm.
do it. That she was just the trigger person. That the motivation for his death lay elsewhere. Um, so where the Black Mafia, I guess I'll just try to explain briefly, was a really harrowing kind of criminal enterprise that ran the drug trade in Philadelphia in the 1970s. They were kind of a combination of street thugs and Nation of Islam loyalists. And the Nation of Islam at the time, despite its kind of small population, had two of the biggest cultural figures to represent them, in Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. Um, and the Black Mafia kind of sprang from that network, and they had the resources to perform administrative and kind of um, administrative things that you wouldn't expect from maybe your more traditional street gang. Uh, and that is something that kind of really distinguished them. And that's something that's really explored in the book Black Brothers Inc. by Sean Patrick Griffin, whose research on the group was what really opened the door for me to pursue this angle. And so it turns out that Carolyn McKendrick, who's the girlfriend of Tyrone, was actually still married to somebody else, and his name was Ricardo McKendrick. And
Hmm.
Ricardo was actually part of this group
The
and
Black Mafia.
of the Black Mafia, um, a high-ranking member, in fact. And it was about 15 or 20 years ago that there was a drug bust in Philadelphia, and it was in all the papers in Jersey and in Philadelphia that FBI had kind of raided a house in South Philadelphia and found uh, something like 600 pounds of cocaine.
Wow.
It's one of the largest drug busts in the city, and it was owned by none other than Ricardo McKendrick Jr. and McKendrick himself, so his son and the father. Um, so these these ties go back quite a long ways. And one of the really alluring aspects that I mentioned in the book is, you have Tyrone coming up, this hotshot boxer who's got multiple girlfriends, including Carolyn McKendrick, who is supposedly separated from the husband, who had just gotten out of jail around the time that, I guess when Tyrone and Carolyn meet up. The question I put to the reader is, during the trial, the Carolyn's attorneys argued that Tyrone had beaten her on multiple occasions. So if that was true, they had several witnesses come up to the stand and testify to that. If that was true, if it was true that Tyrone was laying hands on her, and you had this drug kingpin, part of this vicious group that had, I think by the end, had committed about 40 to 50 cold-blooded murders during its kind of reign of terror. How do you think Ricardo McKendrick would feel? So those are the kind of questions I try to pursue and lay out that had not been that had not been part of the story at the time. His Carolyn McKendrick's affiliation with Ricardo, and also the fact that Carolyn came from kind of a pretty extensive crime family herself.
It's interesting from that perspective, because you point out in the epilogue, I won't go too much into it, how you found her later on in the 1990s. But as a writer, how far do you go with connecting the dots or laying it out in a certain way without going to that next step of or do you write it in a way in which the reader can draw their own conclusions of how you present the information?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was careful to make sure that what was supposition was described as supposition. At the same time, in a weird way, it's like, on the one hand, I'm dispelling certain rumors or certain notions about Tyrone that have existed for the past 5 decades. For example, that he was an outright homosexual and that he had been found in bed with another drug dealer, a male drug dealer. That actually, there's no proof of that. That was a theory put forward by the defense in a courtroom. On the other hand, there have been all these kind of street corner talk going on about Tyrone, about Carolyn not actually being the murderer. And in some sense, I amplify that by trying to lay out what that meant. I think given, the background, the context. See, I think the context was what was always missing, and what made this story so compelling was, people have been living, people close to Tyrone or who knew about it, who were from that area. I think there had always been kind of this unsettled feeling. I think what I try to do is lay out the context of what that meant. And, part of it is connecting the dots, which I think is the best you can do, short of having actually, firm red-handed evidence.
So as far as just boxing wise, Tyrone Everett, how good could he have been as far as a boxer? Was he a guy that could have been a Hall of Fame kind of guy that we would be talking about in this generation, or was he a guy that was on the rise and we just didn't know how good he could have been?
Yeah. If you talk to his brother, or you talk to any of his loved ones, Tyrone would have made the Hall of Fame. He was that good, and he had that much potential. when you talk to his promoter, ironically, Russell Peltz is a little bit more cautious about that. Um, you know, that era, whatever you want to say, if he had lived a few more years, he had the opponents right on his doorstep to make a real prize fighting legacy. At lightweight, you had Roberto Duran, you had Alexis Arguello. I mean, there were all these fighters on the West Coast that could have made for some great fights. And, he was really right there. Let's say he had, let's say he had defeated Escalera, he would have been the champion at that time. You know, this isn't the four belt era. It
Mhm.
was like one of two titles, and that would have been an enormous chip. Um, and I think Gelb and Peltz were really smart. I mean, they had built him up really well to that title shot. He here's the thing: Tyrone was a draw. He had maybe a boring style, relatively, especially for that era. But South Philadelphia came out for him, and that crowd that he generated for the title fight against Escalera in Philadelphia is still the indoor record for attendance of a boxing match in the state of Pennsylvania. That's got to mean something.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I mentioned this in the book, but it was really tragic in a lot of ways, his death, the timing of his death, because Atlantic City was just about to really burst open. Big time TV was coming back. You know, look at all these fighters whose fights we can just look up on YouTube. Bobby Chacon. You know, you can't find Tyrone. He just, he was still on kind of the local television station. So I really think, would he have beaten Duran or Arguello? If I was a betting man, I would probably be hard pressed to bet against those guys.
Yeah, no.
Um, but man, those would have been great fights. People would know him. People would know him in association with, um, he fought Arguello. He gave Arguello all that he could handle, or he beat Arguello. Who knows? I mean, really, you can't say. And
Mhm. I would obviously think that even if he was placed in those fights against Roberto Duran or Alexis Arguello, uh, that even being in those fights, the purse money would have changed his lifestyle. Maybe he wouldn't be in that particular situation that he was, as you explain in the book.
yeah, or maybe it amplifies it.
Maybe it amplifies it
Yeah,
too.
maybe that happens too. Yeah, so it's hard to say. But again, that is what makes the story so compelling.
Sean, Murder on Federal Street, Tyrone Everett, The Black Mafia, Fixed Fights, and the Last Golden Age of Philadelphia Boxing by Sean Nam. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Go to Amazon and buy it. Sean, what are you working on another book right now? Where can we find your writings?
Not at the moment. But I'm always writing for boxingscene.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me there.
Yep.
Um,
And so I wanted to ask you, we got a big fight this weekend. You are still covering boxing or in the boxing space, one of the boxing insiders. What do you think about Canelo Charlo?
yeah, I think it's a fascinating matchup, but I have to say it's the first probably fight of Canelo's that has really um, interested me in a while, I guess since the Bivol fight. Listen, I have to say Canelo hasn't looked that all that impressive in his last several fights. I thought Bivol boxed his ears off. I thought he looked a little pedestrian against Golovkin, even though I thought he clearly beat him. I thought the fight against Ryder was a little alarming, to be honest. The Canelo you saw who could uh was really elusive, this guy is a top-notch defensive fighter. He's hard to hit. And just seeing kind of Ryder kind of push him against the ropes in the second half of that fight, I thought, did he lose a step here? Because he's not bending at the waist as he normally does. Now, Canelo has addressed all those claims in the lead up. He said he was dealing with a few injuries, and he's acknowledged that he didn't look all that great, but he expects to be, in tip-top condition on Saturday night. And I think he needs to be. I think he has a really hungry fighter in front of him. But again, Charlo hasn't fought in a long time. And while I like what he brings to the table, he is a career 154 pounder. Frame wise, he looks like he's bigger, right, than Canelo, but it's not like Charlo. Charlo has been in tough fights, been in tough, competitive, close fights. There's a reason that he drew with Tony Harrison, that he drew with Brian Castano. But this is a really well-rounded fighter who I think he's got it all. He's put it together really well in his past few fights. I like Canelo, but if Canelo is dropped, if what we saw against Ryder was not an anomaly, then I would not be surprised if Charlo manages to spring an upset. But I do see Canelo kind of nabbing maybe a unanimous decision or majority decision after 12. I just feel like he's in Vegas. He understands the rhythms involved in a round. And I feel like, Charlo may not press the issue fast enough. And I think that will allow Canelo to bag a lot of rounds in the early going. But we'll see. Again, it's intriguing. What do you think?
I think that if Canelo loses, a whole ecosystem goes down for boxing and boxing fans. And so what is intriguing to me is which Canelo, like you said, is it a Canelo that's lost a step? Is it a Canelo that it was an anomaly against John Ryder? We shall see. I do think the weight disparity, I think Canelo's heavier. Will kind of prove out. But you never know with Charlo. He could shock the world, and if he does, what is left for Canelo aside from feature fights and Jake Paul saying, "Hey, I'm ready for that fight now." So that's what, from the casual point of view, I think. I do think Canelo wins. If it's anywhere close and it goes after 12, he wins. If Charlo is even edging him out, I think Canelo wins. A split decision. I just think that Charlo has to go get it. Like you say, he has to start early and put the pressure on him.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see Charlo necessarily winning a decision unless he really just, takes over.
I'm just thinking that he'd have to knock down Canelo a couple times for him to get to that, to win a decision.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's happening. So, Sean, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. Once again, find the book on Amazon. It's a great read. I will hopefully talk to you again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Happy to be on anytime. Thanks, Jason.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too.